The purpose of this forum is to give progressive voters an opportunity to hear candidates, discuss what's most important to them, and why their campaign deserves the support of the progressive community. Let me just say a few words about why we're proud to convene this event. The nation was conceived of, launched in New York City by a small group of abolitionists in 1865. One of them, the architect of Prospect Park, Central Park, Frederick Law Olmsted. And New York has been our hometown since 1865. We've just moved further uptown. We're now in the Garment District. And we have made mayoral endorsements in the past, though the nation currently doesn't support any candidate. That could change. Perhaps our most notable, also controversial endorsement was in 2013, when Bill de Blasio openly credits the nation with bringing him from the fourth in the field. And yes, we've seen disappointments, policies unfulfilled, but it's worth remembering that de Blasio and the other candidates at that time came out of Bloomberg's New York, what the nation in a special issue called the Gilded City. The reason we endorsed was a commitment to reimagining, boldly reimagining, a progressive egalitarian city. And he had a signature issue. We're going to hope to hear from you about your signature issue, the universal pre-K, which didn't, to say the least, get much support from Albany. But it's an honor to be with you tonight, because to undertake leadership of the city at this time after the pandemic, after so many people have died, the city is ravaged, the economy so difficult. It's a time of fractiousness and fracture, but also of hope. And it's a measure of everyone here that you want to lead the city with wisdom, vision, and governance. And I think fundamentally tonight, it's also a chance to revisit the meaning of the city itself. What kind of New York do we want to be? So I want to turn it over and thank you again for participating, to my colleague, Don, the editor of The Nation, and again, grateful that you could join.
Hi.
Unmute.
Sorry. Thank you, Katrina. I'm not going to lean too much on the nation's endorsement of Bill de Blasio, except to say that that I came on after that. So. But as Katrina pointed out, the nation was founded in New York City. She tactfully left off the fact that it was first conceived of at the Union League Club and spent many decades as the house organ of the Republican Party. So we've come a long way since then. Yes. And we're very delighted to have this forum for progressives. I also want to say that, we invited all of the leading candidates to participate tonight, and we're obviously particularly grateful to those who are here. But, somebody said, well, what should we do? What do we do if Andrew Yang won't show? And we said, well, none of our people are going to vote for him anyway. So we can talk about fending off or front runners and cross endorsements. We can get into all that. I'm looking forward to, not just hearing about the issues and your positions, but also about the mechanics, because, this is the first mayoral election held under ranked choice voting. Our own John Nichols is writing a ranked choice voting, a guide for beginners, which we'll be posting early enough in the primary season so that the perplexed among you can take a look and reflect. All I would say, having done a little bit of research on this, mainly by reading John's past pieces on ranked choice voting, is if there's someone you really don't want to be mayor, don't rank them. You don't have to. No, a surprising number of people think that you have to fill out every line, and that is not the case. So, we've got 4 people here tonight. If your line goes beyond 4 people, you're obviously making a mistake. Anyway, with that, I'm just going to say a very brief word about each of our panelists and then ask the first question. So Maya Wiley, who will be going first, has been counsel to the mayor, a New York University professor. Also, she was the former chair of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board and is currently a legal analyst for NBC and MSNBC. Shaun Donovan was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in President Barack Obama's cabinet. He was also director of OMB at the end of the Obama administration. And perhaps equally pertinently for those of us here tonight, he was the head of HPD, the Housing and Preservation Department in New York City from 2004 to 2009. Kathryn Garcia served as New York City's 43rd Sanitation Commissioner. She was also the CEO of the New York City Housing Authority. So I'm hoping that we'll have lots of talk about housing tonight. And she was the city's COVID food czar. Scott Stringer is New York City's controller and the former Manhattan Borough president, a former New York assemblyman, a proud Manhattanite, and an advocate of bike lanes, which as a New York City cyclist, I want to be grateful for. Anyway, the first question, so I'm going to let you all go first with your statement. So Maya, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Coming to the nation is a little bit of a homecoming since I was able to place a lot of opinion pieces and really was kind of the start of my getting to be someone who spoke on MSNBC. So it's a pleasure to be here. Now, look, I'm not running for mayor because I'm a politician, because I'm not. I am someone who is born of civil rights activists. My earliest memories were being on the picket line and not knowing what a picnic was, because family activities were all about the activism and all about racial justice. And in particular, recognizing at the beginning of the economic justice movement, my father recognized a thing that we now call intersectionality, but that it was Black women who needed to be at the forefront of unraveling this thing called race and poverty and gender. So I grew up in that, but that's living in a community where I was in a segregated school that was overcrowded and underfunded, where my neighbors were being displaced because the rent was going up and their jobs didn't pay them enough to pay it. Those are my earliest personal traumatic experiences. And it led me to go to law school, to Columbia Law School, knowing and going to law school to be a civil rights lawyer, a racial justice advocate, but one who was fortunate enough not just to work at the ACLU on things like fair education funding, to work at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund on access to healthcare. After 9/11 hit, I founded an organization called the Center for Social Inclusion that actually named structural racism with a small group of other racial justice organizations to say it is the very disinvestment in our communities that itself perpetuates this thing we call race and poverty and exclusion. And so we fought that on every front. And after 12 years of leading that, and including writing a piece for The Nation called Dante's Dad, where I pointed out that Dante's dad, not someone I knew, but that Dante's dad should look at initiatives like the Red Hook Initiative in Brooklyn to see local community-based initiatives that were getting broadband to folks at Red Hook houses. And, that led to me becoming the first Black woman to be a council to New York City mayor. And I took that job, not because I ever thought that I would work in city government, but because it was an opportunity to show city government how it could be transformative for our communities, for every community, but particularly for communities of color. And it was a proof point for me, because I was able to show the city marshaling both revenue streams and 4 different agencies to get every single resident in Queensbridge houses free broadband. We did other things too, like the first sanctuary city piece of legislation that the city had ever done that I was able to unstick. But I say this because the promise of city government is clear, that it should be investing in every one of our residents in order to live a full life and a life with dignity. And that promise can be prophecy if we have a leadership that does not take the politics of the path of least resistance, but really sees our communities as innovators and sees the opportunity to use all the resources of government to bring it to bear on our problems and to solve them collectively. So I've got a plan called New Deal New York, where we will invest $10 billion capital construction modeled off of the New Deal to create 100,000 new jobs, but where we will be doing local targeted hiring. And not just that, not just getting jobs to our communities hit hard by COVID, that are communities of color, that are good union jobs, but also recognizing that we can procure from our small businesses and our local manufacturing, that we can also build things that help solve problems like more affordable housing, like creating community care centers, which are drop-off centers for care. So I know we'll have more conversation as we move forward here, but I tell you that the reason I'm running is not because I see the job as a political one, but because I know that the role is a partnering one in what is transformative for what ails us. And frankly, it did predate COVID, and it included systemic racism, it included an affordability crisis, and it's one that this crisis gives an historic opportunity to solve. And that's why I'm running.
Thank you very much. Secretary Donovan.
Thank you. Honored to be here tonight among the four that showed. So thank you for hosting us. More importantly, thank you for your leadership for many, many years, as we heard, Katrina, in your opening. I believe I'm a unique candidate to be mayor at this moment because I combine deep, deep experience in moments of crisis, the biggest, boldest, progressive ideas for the future of this city, and the experience at all levels of government to translate those ideas into reality in the lives of New Yorkers. I became a public servant because I grew up in a different time of crisis in this city. As a child, I watched homelessness explode on our streets. I watched communities like the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn crumbling to the ground. And it lit a fire in me to go to work on behalf of the city that I love. I started volunteering in a homeless shelter in college, went to work for the National Coalition for the Homeless. And then when I finished school, came back, went to community organizing training and started working with a nonprofit that was partnering with Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood in the East Brooklyn congregations, with Nos Quedamos in the South Bronx. I went to work rebuilding those same communities I'd seen crumbling as a child. And that began a 30-year career on the front lines of housing and homelessness, racial and economic justice that taught me what it means to lead through crisis. I was housing commissioner in this city in the wake of 9/11. I was housing secretary in the wake of the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes. When Sandy hit our shores, President Obama asked me to lead the entire federal recovery effort. And then he asked me to take on the federal budget, the $4 trillion federal budget, and just weeks later, Ebola emerged. And I went to work sitting side by side with Dr. Fauci, all of our health leaders across the government to make sure that an emerging global health threat didn't become a pandemic that cost more than 30,000 of our neighbors their lives. So I know what it means to lead through crisis. And through every one of those crises, I've seen that those who are most vulnerable before the crisis hits are always hurt the worst by it. So I'm outraged, but not surprised that COVID has disproportionately devastated our communities of color. I have led through my career by putting those who are most vulnerable at the forefront. It's why when I was HUD secretary, I led the strategy that dramatically reduced homelessness around this country. We cut street and family homelessness by 25%. In more than 80 cities and states, we ended veteran homelessness, not reduced it, but ended it. It's why, as HUD secretary, I also led the way on the Fair Housing Act. I was the first cabinet secretary in history to endorse marriage equality, and I did path-breaking work to ensure that transgender rights were at the center of the Fair Housing Act. I also did the same for Black and brown communities. It was work that earned me the attacks of Donald Trump when he still had a Twitter account. He said that we had destroyed the suburbs by ensuring that everyone, no matter the color of their skin, who they worshiped, who they loved, could live wherever they choose. And I'm proud to have been the subject of those attacks. It's also why I led the way on climate change, creating the Green Climate Fund that was a key piece of getting the Paris Climate Agreement done and many other progressive priorities. And it's why I will lead with those ideas as mayor. I would appoint the first ever chief equity officer in the history of the city, reporting directly to me with power over every agency to ensure that we're living up to commitments to make this city more equitable. It's why I would reorient the way we plan our city around 15-minute neighborhoods. Today in this city, you can predict the life chances, even the life expectancy of a child by the zip code they grow up in. That is wrong, and it must end. And it would end by ensuring that every single New Yorker has, within 15 minutes of their front door, everything they need for a life of opportunity. And it's why I would create equity bonds, ensuring that every child born in this city gets $1,000 placed in an account, and depending on their income, up to $2,000 more each year. It means a child born into poverty in this city would graduate high school with more than $50,000 in an account to go to college, to buy a home, to start a business. Because I understand that the root of inequality in this city is the racial wealth gap, where the average Black family has 1/10 the wealth of the average white family. The average Latino family, 1/8 that of a white family. That must end, and it will end with equity bonds. So I thank you for having me tonight. I look forward to the discussion of ideas. And I believe I'm the candidate with the biggest progressive ideas to repair and rebuild this city, but also to reimagine it as a city that works for everyone. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Shaun. Kathryn Garcia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, and I apologize for being delayed. The world of Zoom. I am thrilled to be here, and I have been accountable to New Yorkers for the last 14 years as a public servant. So even if you didn't know my name, you knew my work. At the Department of Environmental Protection, I was responsible for clean water in your tap and clean harbors. At sanitation, I picked up your trash and recycling, and I plowed your snow. And at NYCHA, I led the change that had begun to ensure that we were no longer exposing our children to lead. And I have been called on to serve in every crisis. During Hurricane Sandy, I was the incident commander at DEP and had to get 42 pumping stations back online within 3 days. And during COVID, set up a food program that delivered 130 million meals in 6 months. And I'm running for mayor because I know that New York is the best damn city in the world. And I want our city to be more livable and healthier for every family, no matter your borough, your zip code, the color of your skin. But I'm ready to roll up my sleeves on day one and get us to that New York. A New York where every family has the same opportunities, the same 5-star education, and the same access to growth. A New York where everyone can have a good paying job and can afford to raise a family. A new green economy, an investment in green infrastructure, where the path to the middle class will be green collar jobs out of CUNY and our trade schools. A New York where we have permanent affordable housing and paths to homeownership. A New York with faster and reliable public transit from buses to subways. A New York where we all feel safe in our streets and the streets are alive with thriving small businesses and arts and culture that makes New York so special. But our city needs someone at the helm that doesn't just have a vision for a better tomorrow, but can also get us there. You should be supportive of me because I am the only one who is ready today to hit the ground running and deliver services for all New Yorkers. I've done it before. I always get the hard jobs, whether it was my day job of clean water, snow, trash, or when I've been tapped to lead in times of crisis, such as with food distribution or as interim chair at NYCHA, sometimes all at the same time. All of New York City deserves a mayor that not only deeply understands the issues, but loves this city and knows that being mayor means showing up to work every day, treating New Yorkers like customers, and that political platitudes don't solve problems, hard work does. And I have a real New York story. I grew up in Brooklyn in a multiracial family. My parents, a teacher and a labor negotiator, adopted me and 2 of my siblings, and were able to raise all 5 of us on civil servant salaries. I am a product of public schools, and I raised my family here. I live 2 whole blocks from my mother, and am now about 15 blocks from my son. But I really want to make sure that my kids can grow here and have their kids here. I envision a city where every family can have that same experience and where every kid, no matter their zip code, can be whoever they dream of being. So I wake up every morning excited to deliver a better city for you. And when I'm elected mayor, that is what I will continue to do. So I really thank you for your time today.
You're muted. Thank
Sorry,
you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Katrina. Sorry, I didn't want to cough while you were speaking. Thank you very much, Ms. Garcia. Scott, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for this invitation. Look, I don't have to tell any of you on the Zoom tonight. Right now, our city is facing three crises: an economic crisis, public health crisis, and a social justice crisis. And this is not like the Great Recession. This is not even like 9/11 or the city's fiscal crisis. This is akin to the Great Depression. We saw bread lines and food lines and people who lost life, mostly in Black and brown communities. We saw a whole shutdown of our economy. And we also know the collateral damage that went with that. We cannot afford to reopen this city or our economy the same way we closed it. And I'm running for mayor because I believe I have the vision, the skills, and the experience to ensure that we don't just turn the corner on this crisis, but upend the status quo and transform the city to be stronger, fairer, and more just for our next generation. You know, the next 4 years of this mayoralty will inform the next 25 years of our city. And I have been working for this city and believing in the city my whole life. I started out as a little young activist at the age of 12, putting up campaign posters for my cousin Bella Abzug. And I haven't stopped since, whether it's protests, rallies, I have been there. I've been a housing organizer, and I have been a lifelong public servant. And, you know, as controller, I look at the budget that Albany passed this week, and I can't help but think back when, in the 90s, when I was in the assembly, it was a different world. We had that era of Pataki tax cuts for the wealthy, Shelley Silver's backroom deals with developers, but there was a handful of us who stood up and fought back. And you could always count on your fingers who voted against vacancy control. I was one of them. I rejected the commuter tax. I believed and fought for this notion that we shouldn't build more prisons to mass incarcerate young Black and brown kids from the city, and who thought that every child deserved an equal shot at quality education. Now, there were a few of us, like Citizen Action. We got things done. I was the first legislator to introduce the first tax the rich bill, the Stringer Like to Eve bill. We put it on the floor to kick off a conversation about how we could build our economy from the bottom up. I delivered the first in the nation ethics reforms in Albany and ended empty seat voting. And now, a few years later, it's pretty remarkable for me to see an amazing new generation of leaders that what they were able to accomplish this week. Rent relief, support for undocumented workers, fair funding. These are all a 30-year fight that we won. And this is what you get when you take on the powers that be. And I was the first major elected official to join the movement to take out those IDC Democrats. Just as I was the first to call for closing Rikers, one of the first to end stop and frisk. And as controller, I did the first nation's divestment from private prisons, and I just divested $4 billion from fossil fuels. I also am the only candidate with a plan for deeply affordable housing. I have never been afraid to take on powerful interests, and I'm not going to change that now. Our city needs a mayor with bold vision who can bring transformational ideas from the City Hall steps into City Hall. And we need a progressive coalition to get it done. And that is what I intend to do. Look, I understand the de Blasio administration, and there were many worthy people who were in that administration. But this was a progressive administration with some big ideas, but couldn't govern, couldn't deliver on NYCHA, couldn't deliver on affordable housing, built housing with big developers, not with community organizations. They built more housing for people who make $150,000 than families who made less than $40,000. It's why we have a homeless crisis and why we are spending money without any measurable results. So I'm going to be the progressive mayor that gets things done. I've been an elected official. I know how government works. I've gotten elected citywide. I've built the multiracial, intergenerational labor progressive coalition that's going to take on the moneyed interests in this race. People who are not part of the campaign finance system, but are trying to run around it. This is our moment not to go backwards, but we need a new paradigm for the city. I've got two little kids. I got married late in life, a third grader and a second grader. When I think about the possibility of being mayor, I look through their eyes and the lens of what I could do for my kids. But as mayor, I'm going to represent all the children, the kids who are in public housing without internet access, the kids who are in homeless shelters who don't have remote learning devices. We've got to end this, and we got to end it now. And we need a new way of thinking about how we actually work our government for the people who have been left out. Remember, you know this nation, Wall Street made bank on this pandemic, $58 billion in profit. But just in Albany today, we finally raised taxes on the wealthiest people so that they can pay a little more. I will not squander that revenue. I will not waste that money. I will invest it with the communities that were hit hardest by COVID. I have a plan, but I also have a record of getting things done and building coalitions. I ask for your consideration.
Thank you all. I'm going to kick off with a question, and perhaps we will just carry on with people going in the same order. So Ms. Wiley, if you can answer first, and then as in the same order that you spoke. And the first question I'd like to ask is, a lot of us have been disappointed by various aspects of the de Blasio administration, but it's also true that his signature initiative, universal pre-K, has transformed early childhood education in the city. So what I ask each of you to speak about briefly is, what would your one signature initiative be? Ms. Wiley.
Well, thank you. It is hard to pick one because we do not live single issue lives, but I will say that I am going to create a universal care economy. I'm very, very proud to have been endorsed by 1199 SEIUs, not just the largest local in the city with over 200,000 members, but in this country, but that really represents the care economy. Are essential workers. But one of the things we know about this pandemic is that it has decimated work, in particular, work for women and work for women of color in the care economy, but it has also pushed women out of the workforce. We've lost a decade in this workforce. But one of the top 3 expenses in the city is caring for our family members, particularly children. So one of the things that we're going to do is take and put $5,000 into the pockets as grants, as family care grants for the neediest families in this city, so that they can care for family members, whether it's because it saves, they can actually not work those hours in order to care for family because they have a subsidy that will help them, or to help them pay for care. But we're also going to create community care centers. Those are drop-off centers where there will be union jobs, good high road jobs, but where you can drop off a child or an elderly parent or grandparent and know that you're going to get quality care. But we're going to co-locate in those community care centers other community-based organizations and government support services, so that it's also a one-stop shop for what families need. And we're going to start that in the communities that have been devastated by COVID, that have been both our essential workers, our communities of color that have lost 88% of those who have died from COVID. But this really is a game changer in terms of how we think about care, as well as the caring economy. So that will be my signature, and that's what I will get done. And I will take the money from the New York City Police Department, from Department of Corrections, in our cost savings and our restructuring of policing, so that we are investing in our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan.
Well, I agree with Maya. It's like asking us to pick among our children, to pick a favorite signature policy. And I do think that one of the failures of this administration has been to do many things well at one time. And a mayor of New York has to be able to do that and lead. But if I do have to pick one of those children, it would be 15-minute neighborhoods. And I said a little bit about this in my opening. I've worked starting 30 years ago in communities that have been left behind again and again. And I have seen over and over again the deep injustice of being able to predict a child's life chances, even life expectancy, by their zip code. It's the single greatest predictor in our city, in our country, of their life chances. And that has to end. And it will only end until we reorient the way we plan our city around 15-minute neighborhoods. What's a 15-minute neighborhood? Well, if you live in a wealthy community in New York, you understand what a 15-minute neighborhood is. You have, within 15 minutes of your front door, everything you need for a life of opportunity. A great school for your children, a job that sustains your family, or transportation that gets you there quickly. You have the healthcare that you need to get a COVID test or to get a vaccine, but you also have prenatal care and preventive care, mental health care. And you have all of the things that ensure that the underlying health disparities we saw lead to disproportionate death rates in COVID are equalized. You have healthy food available nearby. You have a park to walk and play in. And there are many things you don't have. You don't have a concentration of pollution, of peaker plants, of all of the traditional disadvantages we've heaped onto our communities of color decade after decade. So I would lead by ensuring that every community is a 15-minute neighborhood, reorient the way we plan our city, use the chief equity officer to create real accountability and measurement every time we plant a tree, every time we create a new park, every time we invest in transportation, that we ensure that it's being done based on which communities have and which don't within 15 minutes of their front door.
Thank you. Ms. Garcia?
Thank you. And I'm going to concur with everyone. We've all spent a lot of time thinking about policy and what our visions are for the future. But in picking just one, which is really, I honestly believe you got to be doing everything at the same time or you're not going to make fundamental change. I believe that the thing that I want to leave this city is a really true green future. That we have 150 million more square feet of green infrastructure across this city. That we have eliminated the peaker plants and turned Rikers Island into a renewable energy hub. That we are making the investments in the Green New Deal for NYCHA. That we have electrified all of our school buses. Because all of these environmental programs mean not only are we protecting our planet, but we're healthier today. Our air is cleaner today. Our streets are cooler today. And I know that I have been in a position where I have been able to do some of this work over time. I have seen the impact of natural systems and how much better and cheaper they are than trying to clean something up at the end of a pipe. I have seen what our green watershed does to make it so that we don't spend $100 million a year on energy because we let something get dirty. We know that we want a city that is more livable. Parks and green infrastructure do multiple jobs and they create jobs. They can create real union jobs moving forward and ongoing jobs. We have to take care of what we build. So I envision a greener city where everyone has access to a park, where every playground is green and we no longer have asphalt. We have to ditch diesel and fight asthma against asphalt. So that is my vision for the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Stringer.
I have an education plan, a climate plan, a lot of details to deliver, but I want to address an issue that I think is paramount to reopen the city. And that is to own up to the fact that there's 500,000 people who are one step away from homelessness. There are over 60,000 people tonight that sleep in shelter, half for children. There are shelters so dangerous, I've done the audits, that we have little babies in cribs where we found mice droppings and cribs next to heaters. That's very dangerous. And so I want to make sure that we're finally going to do something that Michael Bloomberg couldn't do or Bill de Blasio wouldn't do, and that is to build real low-income housing. I didn't say affordable housing, I said low-income housing. And the truth is, we have relied on the big developers to trickle down and build affordable housing. I've calculated this. I'm a former borough president. I know about land use and zoning. And so here's what I'm going to do specifically on day one, because you got to be ready to do it on day one. I'm going to access the thousands of vacant properties in the city. I've cataloged those properties. I'm going to make sure that we return that land that we own back to the people. I'm going to give not-for-profits and housing organizations the opportunity to build those new affordable low-income units. I'm going to end the 421A subsidy. I'm going to redirect a new subsidy to get the units to an AMI that reflects the dire need of our communities. You know, this administration built more housing for families who earned $150,000 than for families who made less than $30,000. And we've got to redirect our priorities. This will not be an easy journey because I'm not just stopping with the vacant land. It's time to own up to the fact that we have a housing emergency. And we did not get help from Washington, not in Democrat or Republican administrations, and we didn't get help in mayoral administrations. We have got to say very clearly that any new development must set aside 25% affordable. It's the only way we're going to solve this crisis. No ifs, ands, or buts. And we can't keep playing the numbers game. You know, Bloomberg had a bunch of housing numbers. It was a game. De Blasio had his game. He doubled it. But here's what happened. We ended up having this huge conversation about homelessness, and nobody stepped up and said, why don't we give homeless people a home? And why don't we redirect supportive services? And if we're really going to be progressive, we got to stop talking about this and take the bold opportunity with the resources we have from the stimulus, from the new taxes on millionaires, through our own redirected subsidies, and do what Mayor LaGuardia did and build public housing, and do what other mayors have done and build Mitchell-Lama housing, and go give land and buildings back to the people and create an opportunity for the frontline workers to live in this city. That's what I'm gonna do on day one. And I got the experience to do it. I was a borough president. I know a little bit about land use and zoning. I attract good people to work for me, housing activists. You know, in the controller's office, we actually invest in affordable housing. People don't really know that. So I'm ready to go, and we've got to do this. Otherwise, nothing can move forward unless people of modest means have a roof over their head.
Thank you. Katrina?
I'd like to, I think the crisis of homelessness in this city is so severe. I'd like to dig a little deeper and ask the three other candidates, Maya Wiley, Kathryn Garcia, and Shaun Donovan, to speak to what their housing plan would be. And perhaps a subset, there is an ongoing kind of conversation here about vision and experience. Many of you have addressed it, but I'd be interested, and not to single out Maya, but just you know, the coalition of progressive forces is a way to get things done. But if you might speak to that in the context of the housing, how you would get it done, because you did say it's not political. And I think politics is important. Anyway, so would like to hear more about the homeless issue, because it's very, very deep in our city.
Why don't we, to keep it fair, why don't we have Maya go first and answer that, and then we'll have
go
Kathryn, and then perhaps Scott, you can respond to that, since this was your signature issue, and I don't want to eat up your airtime. Go ahead, Ms. Wiley.
Thank you. I'll clean up if I can.
So look, I'm a human rights lawyer. That's what a civil rights lawyer it is. And I've done human rights work, and housing is a human right. And everyone is housing ready. And one of the things that we have to do is recognize that we have a tremendous amount of resources to bear as a city government on solving this problem. And it starts with the will. Part of why I mentioned the point about politics is the issue is not avoiding the hard things that we have to get done. It's facing them down, whether it's politically difficult or not. And when you come from a people, rather than a political machine, part of that means is your accountability as to whether you're producing for people. If you take homelessness, and we know homelessness means AIDS, far too many, literally almost 60,000 people, but there are folks that are families, as Scott said, creating more deeply affordable housing that's affordable if you make $15,000 a year, not just if you make 150, is something that we can do. It's part of why I have my New Deal New York plan to spend $10 billion to build things we need built, including deeply affordable and permanently affordable housing. but it's also leveraging the fact that when we're talking about street homelessness, which is also a humanitarian crisis in this city, and one that has to do with the fact that we're spending far too much money, $3 billion, putting folks in congregate shelters that they don't want to be in. And it's part of the reason some folks, as dangerous as the street is, feel safer on the streets than in the congregate shelters. But we're spending $1,200 a month in homeless vouchers for folks who need supportive housing. Tell me where you can get an apartment in the city for $1,200. Only 3% of folks who get these vouchers can actually get an apartment with them. So we actually have the opportunity both to increase the subsidies for our folks in terms of in terms of housing vouchers, so that actually can get you an apartment. But it's also, because that would be cheaper than what we're doing right now, but it's also recognizing that supportive housing and more partnerships for not-for-profit housing developers, and also the providers that are actually doing the outreach to homeless, who know how to create relationships and trust with people who are homeless, expanding safe havens for folks that are often important for them, but also getting folks into permanent housing with supportive services on site. This is something that the current crisis actually gives us the ability to do faster. I've stood with the Men of the Lucerne and Chance the Baron, the homeless hero, and the Open Hearts Initiative on the Upper West Side, because they've actually demonstrated the model of taking a vacant hotel, turning it into an apartment that you have a key to as someone who was formerly homeless, and then co-locating the services on site and having a community support system. It is a model that we should be expanding throughout the city because it has worked. And that is what I will do as mayor. And that is not about politics. In fact, it's facing politics down and saying people first, people come first. And the outcome has to be for our people.
Mr. Donovan?
So as I said in my opening remarks, this is an issue that is at the core of my public service. It's what, as a child, made me angry enough, asking myself, how can it be in the wealthiest city, in the wealthiest country on earth, we allow our neighbors to sleep on the streets? It began me working in homeless shelters with the National Coalition for the Homeless, and ended with me leading the national homelessness strategy for President Obama that dramatically reduced homelessness across this country. Again, 25% reduction in street and family homelessness, where we really got the resources we needed from a Republican Congress. We ended veteran homelessness in more than 80 cities and states. This is a solvable problem, and I'm the only one in this race who's actually solved it at a city level and at a national level. And so here's what we need to do. For family homelessness in particular, we have to make sure that we are stopping people from falling into homelessness. And right now, we have a city voucher system where you basically have to be evicted in order to get help. That has to change. I would invest $2 billion a year between city funding, state and federal, and reorient the system to make it much more flexible and able to catch families before they fall into homelessness. And I would ensure that we actually have, Mayor de Blasio has promised this, but never delivered, citywide right to legal counsel so that you can be protected from eviction before you end up in a homeless shelter or in a housing court. It's fundamental, and that has to be the way we prevent it. We do need significantly more affordable housing, deeply affordable housing in this city. And we need to recognize that even if you put as much city capital as I've proposed, I have the most aggressive affordable housing proposal of anybody in this race, $4 billion a year in additional city capital going in to ensure more affordable housing. We have to recognize that if you're a family making $15,000 a year, you can't even afford the maintenance on an apartment. So you can put all the subsidies you want, and you need Section 8 and other rental assistance from the federal government to actually make housing deeply, deeply affordable for the lowest income. I'm the only one who in the race who has really worked with the Biden administration and Congress to increase Section 8 funding. It's something we can do with my leadership at City Hall to ensure we have the adequate subsidies. The last thing I would say is that we also need to understand that the chronically homeless, those folks we see on the streets every day who are struggling not just with housing, but with mental illness, with substance abuse, we are never going to solve this problem if we think we're going to attack it with homeless programs alone. And that is what this mayor has done. We need to reimagine the right to shelter in this city as a right to housing, reorient the system, create what's called a coordinated entry system. It's the leading edge of the way cities across the country are solving homelessness. We help develop those across the country. New York City has never really put one in place. Every time someone leaves Rikers, every time someone leaves the mental health wing of one of our public hospitals, they get directed immediately to what's called supportive housing. It's what Maya described at the Lucerne, but New York invented that model decades ago. We need to invest in it more and create it everywhere so that folks can immediately go to get the help they need rather than falling through the cracks onto our streets. And we need to invest in that. People say we can't afford to do this at this moment. I say we can't afford not to do it, because guess what? It not only saves lives, it actually saves money. How can that be? Because where do you get your health care when you sleep on our streets? In the emergency room. You cycle in and out of the most desperate and most dangerous and most expensive forms of institutional care in the city. We spend over $400,000 per year per incarcerated person at Rikers. Think about that, over $400,000 per year. If we redirected that into supportive housing, as I would do, and as I've done again and again in my career, we could end the cycle of homelessness in this city and make this a city that works for everyone.
Thank you. Ms. Garcia?
Affordability and homelessness are one of the core things that we have got to confront coming out of COVID. We know that we could be facing an eviction crisis at this moment that will just exacerbate an already incredibly challenging problem. This is why I intend to be focused on ensuring that we are providing people with legal services across the board, that we are providing funding so that if you are in arrears, that you can pay it back. I'm very happy to see what passed at the state level, because that gives a huge amount of money to ensure that we are not penalizing our small landlords or our tenants who have, through no fault of their own, been unable to pay the rent during this last year. We need to continue to build. That's why I have said that I will do 50,000 units of deeply affordable housing for under 30% of AMI, and that I would do an additional 10,000 units of supportive housing. We also need to unscramble our property tax system that actually penalizes rental housing in favor of single family homes. Third rail in New York City politics, I believe I'm the one who can solve that. We also know that we are overpaying for shelters instead of getting people into permanent homes, whether or not that's through new buildings or through increasing the subsidy. So instead of paying, I don't know, $20,000 a year for a family, we pay $60,000 a year for someone who stays in our shelter system for a year. That's insanity. We get terrible results, and we pay a fortune for our terrible results. We need housing that heals. We know that when you have permanent housing, your health is better. You're able to actually succeed in your education. You have more career opportunities. It is foundational for your success moving forward. So I have a plan that talks about not only confronting homelessness, but also affordability writ large in this city, particularly in the rental market. But we know for those who are street homeless that they do need supportive housing. You can't just give them an apartment. You gotta have services. And the hotels do provide an opportunity for conversion. Not all of them will have the right setup, but that many of them do. And we should not strand assets as we come out of COVID, but we need to make sure that we are leveraging creatively everything that we have.
Thank you. We're a little late in terms of getting to questions from the audience, so I'm still going to give you your chance, Mr. Stringer, but I'm going to ask you to keep it brief if you might. Although I do want to also ask if you're willing to follow Ms. Garcia and talk about revising the single family housing tax rates for single family housing in New York City, whether you're willing to touch that third rail.
I will touch the third rail, but I wanted to answer the question.
Sure.
Some of my thoughts, because I want to go back to Katrina's question about, is this a political question as well? And first, I want to associate my remarks with Kathryn's important ideas, Maya's important ideas, especially at the Lucerne. I also support a lot of Shaun's proposals. I wish he had this opportunity when it was the Housing Commission to do some of this work, but it's never too late. But I want to get to the question, what Maya said about political machine, because I do agree with her. The political machine has catered to certain interests. They're not happy with the campaign finance program that we have so we can run competitive races. But I think that we do need political solutions. And one of the things that I think we saw, all of us, was that the anti-IDC state senators have transformed Albany. When you look at Julio Salazar, when you look at Alessandro Biaggi, Jessica Ramos, Yulene New in the state assembly, I'm leaving out people because we now have such a base of people. They got elected not as machine candidates, but as progressives who had taken on the status quo. Many people on the Zoom tonight were contributors and activists. And I was proud to help each and every one of them. Bob Jackson today just brought in the AQE funding, senator that went against the machine. This is politics at its best. And I stood with these young leaders, and they're standing with me in this mayor's race. But I do think the mayor has to reset the relationship with Albany politically. And I'm a former assembly member, and I promise you that we're not going to have anyone steal my lunch money in Albany. We have got to build a political progressive coalition, because this is not just a one-shot deal. We're going to have to keep coming back to Albany, because that's how this process works. And I do think we need a little political acumen and strategy to get this done. And Maya's right, it's not the political machine. That's long gone. It's creating a new paradigm for how we can invest in progressive politics.
Thank you. I'm going to kick off with a question from Gail Robinson, and this is for all the candidates. Mayor de Blasio was elected promising to change policing in this city. He, like many other mayors around the country, ran into fierce opposition from the NYPD and police unions. So why would you be able to succeed where he has failed? And again, we'll start with Maya Wiley, please.
Because I come from a racial justice activism background that says you serve the public, and it is the public that has to be kept safe. So that starts with putting the public back in public safety, which literally means, one, recognizing that is civilians. It is the people who need to determine what the job is and is not. You know, I'm someone who not only chaired the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, and I'm, was grateful for the opportunity to get Daniel Pantaleo, the officer who killed Eric Garner, his case over to the police department, both with our most extreme recommendations, but also protecting the civilian prosecution of that case inside the police department. But one of the things that makes clear, and that I think everyone knows is clear, is the police commissioner can't and must not have the sole discretion on what the discipline should be for police officers. That's not putting the public back in public safety, and I will change that. But the other thing is what the job is, because there is a model of policing called problem-oriented policing, but it's a fundamental shift of what the job even is. And there are great pilots out there in this country that demonstrate when police reformulate into problem orientation rather than problem creation, stop criminalizing poverty, but actually see themselves as partners, including to other agencies of government, at where those problems are occurring, so they can point to others and say, that's not our job. Like Eric Garner, who was being accused of literally selling an untaxed cigarette. He was being arrested for selling an untaxed cigarette. There was no public safety issue there. That was a poverty problem, assuming it happened. But for the police to say our job is to arrest is fundamentally something we can shift. But it also means pulling out of the police department roles and functions that simply should not be sent to the police department. And that's mental health crisis response. That is making sure that traffic is handled in a way and a manner that is safe, that makes traffic safety happen, but recognizes you don't need a badge and a gun to do much of what's happening as traffic functions. And what we need counselors in our schools, not cops. Like that, what that means fundamentally is making sure we have trauma-informed care and student support teams in schools so that we're investing in the very things that the research tells us actually supports kids to be effective, to be successful. But all of that really is a reorientation that is absolutely possible. And the truth is, the only reason that we don't see more of it is because there is such a fear for folks who run for public office at what the police unions will say about them. Well, part of why I'm running is I'm running for people and for community. And I don't care what they say about me, because at the end of the day, they're public servants. And unlike every public servant has to be accountable to the people and to doing the job that is the appropriate job. And I will make sure that gets done as mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan, before you answer, I just want to make the point, which I should have made earlier, that we'd like to get as many questions in as possible and answers. So please keep your answers as succinct as you can. I'm not trying to step on anybody's time, but we'd like to get in as many questions as we can, please.
I appreciate that, and I will be quick. I do want to take a point of privilege to respond to Scott's point and correct the record. Actually, homelessness went down when I was housing commissioner in this city, Scott. I went to Albany. You talked about building politics. In Albany, I went to Albany and negotiated the biggest investment in supportive housing the city had ever seen, the New York 3 agreement. And so I did practice what I preached. I walked the walk as housing commissioner, and we made progress on homelessness there. And at the national level, again, I have a record no one else does on this issue. So
It's still cleaning up the Bloomberg housing plan, but okay, listen, I think you're a good
Okay,
guy.
but we're on police now, please. Let's go. Let's address the question.
So I would also say on policing, I have a record that isn't just about talking the talk on this, it's about walking the walk. When I was housing commissioner in this city, I actually took housing vouchers for the first time, gave them to folks coming out of Rikers. And I got a lot of criticism for that. Folks saying, how could you be giving this precious resource to criminals? And the results were remarkable. 95% of those folks a year later were stably housed, hadn't reoffended, were getting back to work. And fundamentally, that to me is the root of not just the work we have to do around policing, but around criminal justice more broadly. We have to put justice in our criminal justice system, and that's going to take 3 things. First, truly reforming policing. We do have to have much more transparency, building on 50A, much more accountability, making sure that we do not allow any police officer to abuse that authority and target Black and brown communities, properly training everyone. I believe we should require police officers to live in this city. Every one of my employees as housing commissioner had to live in this city. Why do police officers not have to reflect their communities? But we also need to reduce the role of the police. And Maya talked some about this. We should not be criminalizing homelessness. We helped set up systems around the country, alternative 911 response systems that send trained mental health professionals, Cahoots in Oregon, many others, dramatic reduction in violence, improvement in services to the homeless. We shouldn't have police in our schools. And I'm one of the few candidates that called clearly to remove them from schools. But we also need to reinvest in our communities. As I said earlier, over $400,000 per incarcerated person per year we're spending at Rikers and getting terrible results. We need to reorient that system to break the cycle of incarceration. Like I did on housing, we can do it in all of these areas, and we must ban the box, which means ensuring that folks can get jobs when they come out of incarceration. In so many other areas, the barriers we put in their way must be removed.
Thank you. Ms. Garcia? And again, please, if you can keep it brief. Or as brief as you can.
I will try and keep it brief. It's a big topic, but I believe that I come with one thing that no one else comes with. I've actually run a uniform agency. I understand how you put in place the structure to have clear and consistent discipline, how you manage a paramilitary force. If you take a bribe for taking someone's private waste and put it in a public DSNY truck, you get fired. This has to be what we bring to NYPD so that we can rebuild trust with communities, so that all communities can feel safe. We need to expand the training, but have it really be embedded in those conversations, those roll calls that happen every day. Because if it isn't talked about every day, if it's a 4-hour course you took at the academy, that doesn't change culture. We need to measure what we want. If we want interactions that are positive with communities, where there is outreach, where there's real problem solving, you got to measure that. If you only measure arrests, that is all you will get. And then we have to promote into the upper ranks the folks who are doing that job. But there are also some practical things we need to do. I believe that police officers should be 25 before they start. We are asking a lot of a very young person to have a badge and a gun and expect things to go well. We need to make sure that those new recruits live within the city, that we are all working together as one community to make sure that we all feel safe. And then finally, I really do believe that we have to ensure that the police commissioner and the chiefs are held responsible for clear and consistent discipline. We outsource it to the 5 DAs, the CCRB, the 2 US attorneys. The people who have to be accountable for delivering that is the management of NYPD. And that oftentimes there's a fight there. But when you have someone in those roles, they drive that message and we get real change.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Stringer. And again, please, as briefly as you can.
I'm gonna make you proud. I was the first elected official that said we should shut down Rikers. And right now, the largest mental health facility we have in the city is Rikers. Half the population is there, not because of crime or all those issues. It's about real mental health problems. And we're warehousing human beings. And we need to build out a mental health system that is going to address that in a very serious way with metrics that actually measure results. And we haven't had that with the Thrive program. We haven't had that with this administration. We've got to drive mental health initiatives to our kids post-pandemic so that they are not going to become part of despair and end up at Rikers or another form of Rikers. And we need a mayor who is going to take control of the police department. We are going to, in my administration, align a police commissioner with my values and reform plan, a public safety plan that emphasizes response to mental health issues in the streets with mental health professionals. The Cahoots program in Oregon, 24,000 calls to 911, mental health responders come, only 150 police officers are needed. And think about this city and how backwards we are in terms of policing. We have to reduce the police responsibilities, and then in its place, we can build out an entirely new way of responding to wellness and mental health issues and quality of life issues. 40% of 40% of 911 calls are not for crimes. Therefore, mental health issues or other things. Everyone thinks we call not 311. I used to believe that too. It's not true. We call 911 for the things police should not be responding to.
Thank you.
And that is why
I'm going to ask this. This comes from Jess Colbert, and I'm going to ask you to keep your responses to under a minute, please. And the question is, the MTA is mostly controlled by Albany. So what can you as mayor do to ensure access to transportation for people without cars in the city, particularly as we've seen during the pandemic when, it's people, the car use has ballooned. So what can the mayor do to ensure access to really equitable transportation, particularly for people without cars? Ms. Wiley, again, please.
Well, starting with one, we have to advocate aggressively with Albany for investments in our subway system. And we know we need the expansions that have been promised. And very, very glad to see what's forming in DC in the form of an infrastructure bill. That's going to matter a lot for our resources for transportation and public transportation alternatives. But we've got transportation deserts in this city, and they are by and large communities of color. This is an issue I worked on as a racial justice advocate. And the fact is, we can and must do a lot more, including following some of the guidance of the Regional Planning Association that has talked about where and how we need more bus rapid transit. Also where and how we need to expand bike lanes as alternatives, right? That's something that we are going to support and endorse. But also recognizing that when we do that, it is about connecting busing and buses to nodes of subways. So this is a kind of planning.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to cut you off there because
Sure, no
I've got to give
problem.
everybody a chance to answer. Mr. Donovan, go ahead.
3 things. I would, as mayor, make sure that in exchange for putting more resources from congestion pricing, from other innovative ways to generate revenue into MTA, in exchange, more control, more board seats, other ways of having real control over the future of our subway system and the future of the MTA. Second, we've got to attack those transit deserts. We've got to make 15-minute neighborhoods real for transportation. I think bus rapid transit is the most effective way to do that. And that is real bus rapid transit, not 14th Street bus rapid transit, real dedicated lanes, elevated platforms, quick on and off, and most importantly, signals that may mean that a bus never waits at a red light. Other cities in the world have done this, we can do it too. Third, innovative micro transit and other forms. We are so far, we have a 20th century transportation system in a 21st century city. Micro transit you can call on your phone for seniors, for people with disabilities, scooters, other forms that really ensure we're getting rid of
Again, I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you. Ms. Garcia.
Yep.
In my vision of a greener city means we also need to ensure that we are incentivizing folks to get out of their cars. This means having a seat at the table with the MTA. And we do need to pay our fair share, but we need to make sure that we also are getting what we need, which is sometimes could be as simple as redone signals so that you actually get to work on time. I have proposed that we need to make sure that we are creating integrated networks of bike lanes, bus lanes, as well as transit through the trains. And so that is what I see is you are putting
Thank you.
together.
Again, I'm going to have to stop you, but thank you very much. Very, very briefly, Mr. Stringer, please.
All right, let me try. I'm going to be the street mayor. I'm going to have buses, bus lanes, bike lanes for safe rides for our high school kids to school with free city bike. And I'm also going to take an opportunity to reimagine the streetscape. Mayors control the streets. We should start acting like it. The other thing we have to do is we have to reimagine our superhighways. The BQE is falling down. Let's not replace it with another superhighway. And then let's deck the Cross Bronx and the Brooklyn and the Bruckner Expressway. Stop. That's it.
Thank you. Okay. Katrina, do you want to ask the last question?
Yeah, this is a lightning round. So predicated on the fact this election is going to be held under ranked choice voting reform, do you endorse anyone here as a second choice?
And if so, who? Ms. Wiley.
I have endorsed Diane Morales as my second choice.
Okay. Mr. Donovan.
I have endorsed Maya Wiley as my second choice.
Okay. Ms. Garcia.
I have not endorsed anyone as my second choice.
And you're not prepared to tonight?
And I am not prepared to make these tonight, no.
Okay.
I've gotten a lot of endorsements in the progressive space. I cannot get one of these candidates to rank me second. I mean, I just can't, but I'm not done yet. Kathryn, coffee tomorrow?
If you can meet me at 5:30, I'll be happy to do it.
All right. Well, thank you all. It's been an incredibly impressive evening. You're all true progressives. We are very grateful to you for showing up and for being so eloquent. If we could realize all of your visions for the city, New York will be a much better place to live. So thank you all for coming. Thank you participants for showing up. Remember, vote early and vote often, as they don't say in New York City. No.
Thank you
but also
very much.
remember, with ranked choice, remember you only vote for the ones you really want. So think about what you've heard tonight and
It was
good
a
luck to
deep, a
everyone.
deeply thought sense of New York as a more humane, resilient, and just city. So thank you very much for taking time